In the very late 65, I mentioned to Ron that I had enough of domestic service and would like to move over into the St. Hill organization itself. He made me the LRH communicator to St. Hill in early 66. My contact with Ron, the tech terminal, only came when I was in session, and there was a lot of staff auditing going on. Qual was very busy. Under John McMaster and then Judy Graham, as she was then, Qual took full responsibility for staff cases. Those were the days when the floating needle became so important. The first rule was that when the PC had an FN, that was the end of that action. And the auditor had to ease the PC off, looking and talking further. If not, Ron said, the PC would only pull in more bank and kill the FN. Not all auditors were masters of easing the PC off. And it was often a very direct jerk of the attention back to PC. But we knew the existing rules and put up with it. In those days also, one would come into Qual or be pulled into Qual for almost any adverse experience. Qual's invariable action was to assess the green form, a list of questions designed to cover a great many things that might be bugging one. The auditor would get a read on some line on the green form, take the appropriate action, and often get an FN on that line. But regardless of where the PC's attention might then be at, and regardless of the original situation that brought the PC in to Qual, the one FN was taken as the full EP for the PC's review. So, going through a review was quite an adventure. First, there was the possibility of being cut off while approaching one's cognition, and then the good chance that what was bugging one would not be addressed at all. Yet one would be declared review complete. A number of us went around this circle, but we all survived, and Ron figured it out. When LRH put the bridge together newly with all the lower grades, we all had our grades rehabbed or run if we had any missing. And for a while it was the rule that before starting any major action, one had all one's grades rehabbed. This got to be really, really boring. But Ron soon removed it as a routine requirement. I did the solo auditors course in the evening, and in 1968, when I went to the Royal Scotland in Valencia to do OT3, that I came into direct contact with LRH there. While I was on the ship in Valencia, he arrived there from the mission into time, and I met him on deck one day. We chatted. He found out I was doing OT3. He squinted into my eyes and said, "You're doing all right." A little later, I was told to attest, did so, and went back to St. Hill. He called me to the ship from St. Hill in 1968. After a while, he made me his personal communicator. I was there to do only his bidding. Over the next few years, I had the great privilege of working with him day by day, and of being CS'd by him, and being able to observe him directly as he went about his work, both in management and in tech. He CS'd my follower frequently, and I think he either wrote or approved any program for my auditing. 2 points I want to make here. First is that it was his habit to write everything that he wanted to convey to others, and to make a carbon copy of everything he wrote. And if he did a verbal briefing, it was always recorded, or I was always there to make notes, or both. The carbon copies that he wrote came to me for follow-up and filing, including all the CSs that he wrote. He wrote many, many CSs. But even with all the pressure of his work, he never failed to remember to put the carbon copy of every CS he wrote for me safely in a drawer in his own desk. The second thing is that I got very accustomed to the standard of his work and the standard of the CSs he trained on the ship, mainly David Mayo and Robin Linslow, amongst others. Now, in late 72, he left the ship to avoid being extradited to France. And of course, he wasn't doing any crew CSing. He was away for a year. On the ship, we had some tech people from other orgs who had come to us for training, including CSs who were under the supervision of the regular crew CS, and I think that was David Mayo. I was getting some auditing during that time and had finished one part of my program. Shortly after that, I was taken into session again and told what we were going to do next. Something immediately told me that the LRH influence was missing. The flow of the auditing had shifted, and I didn't feel quite so secure. A trainee CS had programmed my folder. It was a bit of a shock to find out just how secure I had been feeling as a PC, with the tech line under his supervision. I said nothing at the time and went along with the action. It went sort of okay, and my upset was cleaned up. The experience made me very aware of how LRH pervaded the technical flow from source to CS to auditor to PC, and of how he had taught others to pervade it as he did, and of how the attitude of the CS carries down into the session. I'm sure it happens with many, many CSs, and I'm glad to think that it does. LRH sometimes took actions that today, and even then, we could consider outrageous. For example, on at least 2 occasions, maybe 3, he declared that nobody on the ship could have completed OT3. Everybody who had done the level had to do it again. I figured out once that I'd done my OT3 5 times. Not only that, but in between a couple of these bouts on 3, a lot of us had hours and hours of Dianetics, running endrings, just straight R3R. I had a wonderful time. My auditors were mostly David Mayo, Quentin, and John Delilovich. It never worried me that I was having Dianetics after clear. I figured that LRH knew what he was doing. The auditors knew what they were doing in session, and that if LRH could make the rules, he knew when he could break them. I'll come back to this point later. He kept his eye on me. One day he asked me how I was doing. The way he asked me told the question was not a politeness. I told him I had a slight headache. How long for? He asked. I told him it had been off and on for a few weeks. He acknowledged. Went to his office. A few minutes later, he came to me. He told me that some weeks before, I'd had a listing action that many crew had as a part of a research project of his. There were 3 listed questions and the action. He pointed out to me that the auditor had me list all 3 questions, but the second one hadn't read and shouldn't have been listed. Then he had the thing cleaned up in session. He noticed something was not quite right. He asked me about it, he got my answer, he called for my folder, and took it from there. Another time, he intervened in my sessions in a different way. It could have acted as an evaluation or invalidation, but I didn't take it that way, and I think he knew what he could get away with me. It was like this. In some of the OT materials, LRH states that the time track began at a certain point in time, implying that nothing happened before that point, or nothing important was going on before that point. In my Dianetic sessions, I was coming up with incidents long before that point, and having a lot of fun. This particular day, I was coming up the stairs to my office after session. He was standing outside his office as I came up. Our offices were very close together. He made a remark to me about something I'd done from my post, or rather how I'd done it. He was all right with what I did, but seemed to say that he had done it differently. He lowered his eyebrows at me and turned to go out onto the deck, and he muttered, "But then, I'm not as old as you are." My earliest memories, though, are of the times when LRH took the entire CS load of the ship onto his own desk. This would generally start with him noticing a rash of ethics orders on crew members, or a rise in the number of people going to the medical officer with complaints. One time he did it when 4 or 5 deck people or engineers had little accidents, all within a few days. He examined the folders, had them all taken into session and given an assessment that he wrote. He found that in each case, the person had been exterior when the accident occurred. He took no further technical action at that time. However, if he examined some folders and found out taken the majority of them, he'd take over the CS hat altogether and immediately. Within a couple of weeks, he'd have all the PCs, all the auditors, and all the CSs very happy, and the tech delivery line humming with high-toned activity. This evolution occurred 3 or 4 times on the ship. It had a daily routine. The tech people down below prepared the day's folders. The messenger stacked them up on the floor beside his desk while he and Mary Sue were at dinner. He'd come up after dinner and there'd be a stack, probably that high. Now, just about everything that hit LRH's desk was in writing. That was a lot of paper. And everything that hit his desk, other than PC folders that he called for directly, came to him through me. And of course, much of the traffic from Mary Sue to him was direct, didn't come through me, thank goodness. I had to sort out his traffic, filter it, coordinate it, try to make it as easy as possible for him to handle it. And I had a lot of traffic that came to me that I'd approve or not on his behalf, or traffic from the LRH personal office, which I had direct responsibility for, and that was almost 30 people. I had more than enough to keep me constantly busy for an 18 to 20 hour day. Nonetheless, when LRH settled into his folder work, he'd call me into his office. I'd sit down on the opposite side of his desk, and he'd start chatting. He'd be telling me all about the folder he was looking at, the condition of the PC, the situation for the CS and for the auditor, what he was looking for, what he was finding, and what he was going to do about it. Then he'd write it all up and go on to the next folder. Frequently, when he was all through, he'd send me back to my mountains of paper, saying that he was going to write an HDO bulletin on what he had learned in the evening's work. This is how many of the CS series H3Bs were written. In the morning, the senior CS, usually David Mayer, would muster all the auditors, and they'd go through every folder together according to their auditor and case classifications. Thus they learned very fast and soaked up Ron's technical influence, his flair, and his attitude. He issued plenty of cramming orders and occasionally an ethics condition or two. All these were gone over in the auditor briefings of the following morning.